Hello, Nigel here. I couldn't help noticing that you're still awake. Now, I'm an owl. I'm supposed to be up at night, but you need your sleep. So if it's your allergy symptoms that are keeping you up, here's a word to the wise. Try Xyzal. You see, Xyzal works fast to relieve sneezing, runny nose, itchy watery eyes, and itchy nose and throat. And it keeps going strong for 24 hours, so you can get your sleep and wake up refreshed and ready for a productive day ahead. Be wise, all. Take Xyzal at night. Use as directed. Starts working in 45 minutes.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I focus on crimes committed by military members and veterans, or sometimes their spouses. But don't worry, you don't have to know anything about the military to listen, I promise. You just have to be a true crime enthusiast, and if that's you, welcome home. Today, I have the privilege of bringing you a case that was recommended to me by a family member of the perpetrator and victim. Actually, today's case was recommended to me by the granddaughter of today's victim. Her name is Laura Lee, and she allowed me to use her name when telling today's story. The interesting fact about this case is that when Laura Lee recommended the case to me, it was in a different way than I usually get case recommendations. Family case recommendations usually come with a lot of condemnation of the perpetrator, a case where the perpetrator is shunned away from the rest of the family. But today's case is nothing like that, at least not for the person who orchestrated someone's murder. Stay tuned until the end where I share some of Laura Lee's memories, which might really give you a new perspective. Join me today as I tell you the story of Raeford Mitchell Darroch's death. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning: this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
In the very early morning hours of November 10th, 1979, a shadowy figure of a man crept through the kitchen window at the home of Raeford Mitchell Darroch's mobile home. Raeford lived alone in Bun Level, North Carolina. Once inside, the shadowy figure reached back out the window and someone standing outside handed him a gun. The intruder then walked through the home into the living room, where Raeford had fallen asleep on the sofa watching TV. The man crept over to where Raeford was lying and shot him with the shotgun point blank in the head, essentially decapitating him. The man took Raeford's wallet and quickly exited the house. He went out to a waiting car and drove away into the night with the person who had handed him the shotgun through the kitchen window. Raeford's body was found later that day by his sister Lucille Johnson, and I can't even imagine the trauma that she experienced finding her brother practically with his head shot off. Who would want to kill a man peacefully sleeping on his couch? Was it a robbery? Is that why the man took Raeford's wallet? Well, to answer those questions, we need to rewind a few months. Raeford Darroch was a postal worker and a former Air Force Master Sergeant. He was divorced and had 3 children with his ex-wife, Melicia Dean Taylor Darroch, who went by Dean. There's not a lot of information available on this particular case, but I was able to do some digging on the Ancestry website and found a few documents that can help us paint this picture. Raeford was born on January 21, 1934 in Harnett County, North Carolina, and he was only 45 years old at the time of his murder. Raeford married Dean in Dillon, South Carolina on July 28, 1958. Dean was born in Caswell County, North Carolina on February 8, 1940. That made her 18 years old and Raeford 24 years old when the pair got married. They were married for a little over 10 years when they legally separated on November 25, 1968. I was able to actually locate the divorce decree on Ancestry.com. The box next to wife was checked, indicating that Dean was the plaintiff in the divorce, meaning that she was the one that filed. Under the legal grounds or cause of divorce, the decree indicated a 2-year separation. Dean was granted a divorce from Raeford on December 26, 1972. More information that I learned from the divorce decree showed that Raeford was a high school graduate and Dean had 3 years of high school education. It was the first marriage for each of them. The divorce decree also listed that the Darroches had 3 children under the age of 18 at the time the divorce was finalized. Through Raeford's postal job, he had a life insurance policy that was worth $27,000 in 1979, and that would be approximately $114,000 today. But the policy had an indemnity clause, which meant the payout increased under certain circumstances. In this policy, the increase was double the payout if the policyholder died a violent death. Which honestly, what? That meant that if Raeford died as the result of, say, a shotgun blast to the face, the policy would pay out $54,000, or better yet, $228,000 today. One exception to the double indemnity was death resulting from suicide. If he died by his own doing, then it was worth the basic policy value, which was $27,000. Since the policy was through Raeford's workplace, it was only good as long as he was still employed by the company. Unfortunately, it seemed that Raeford was having some attendance problems at work. The human resource manager at his job called a conference with Raeford and his supervisor, specifically to discuss Raeford's excessive absences. During this meeting, Raeford was notified that if he didn't start coming to work, he was going to be fired. They also told him his benefits were also at risk. He was informed that 31 days after his last day of employment, the life insurance policy would be canceled. By this point, Raeford and Dean had been divorced for 7 years, but I'll give you one guess as to who the beneficiary was for Raeford's life insurance policy. You guessed it. Although divorced for several years, Raeford had never changed his life insurance beneficiary, and that decision would cost him his life. It's unclear how Dean became aware that Raeford was in danger of losing his job, but she realized at that point that he was worth more dead to her than alive and jobless. In September of 1976, Dean Taylor Darroch made a plan. She decided that her ex-husband had to die. Logistically, it might be a little hard for her to do the wicked deed herself because Dean and Raeford lived 130 miles from each other. But Dean didn't let distance stop her. Instead, she enlisted the help of some family members. Dean reached out to her sister, Barbara Jean Crowder, who went by Rena, and she also reached out to their nephew, James Donald Wells, who went by Donnie. Dean wanted to recruit Rena and Donnie to help her kill her ex-husband. And it's likely that Dean chose Donnie because Donnie had a criminal record and he had already served time in prison for armed robbery. So maybe he'd commit another crime. Dean had Rena and Donnie over and told them all about her master plan. She told them that Raeford needed to die because he had a drinking problem and that he had been harassing her and her new boyfriend. Dean also claimed that Raeford hadn't been paying child support for their children. Dean then told her sister and nephew that Raeford was in jeopardy of losing his job. And if he lost his job, then he would lose his life insurance policy. Dean wanted the life insurance policy payout, and lucky for her, Donnie agreed to be her hitman. The week after she met with her sister and nephew, Dean gave Donnie 20 Valium pills that she had gotten from a doctor. Donnie purchased 2 bottles of liquor. He poured out half of one of the bottles and dropped in all 20 Valium pills. Then he popped on over to his Uncle Raeford's house in North Carolina with both bottles in tow. When he got to his uncle's house, Donnie and Raeford sat down and they drank from the full bottle, leaving the half-full bottle laced with Valium untouched. They watched the ball game together and sipped on their drinks, probably told some jokes, and when the game was over, Donnie grabbed the Valium-laced bottle and drove back to Virginia. You see, Donnie got cold feet that night, and he dumped out the laced alcohol. But someone would not be happy with this decision. Donnie waited a few days before he confessed to Dean that he went to Raeford's house in North Carolina, but he couldn't go through with the murder. After Donnie's failed assassination attempt on Raeford, Dean put a murderous plan on the back burner, at least for a few weeks. Months went by, and on the first weekend of November 1979, Dean called another meeting, again with Donnie and Rena. They went for a drive and they discussed killing Raeford again. And just like last time, Donnie agreed that he would be the one to commit the murder. It's unclear whose idea it was this time, but this time they decided that Valium was not a certain death. So they decided that Raeford would have to be shot with a shotgun. The trio thought it would be better because a shotgun wouldn't leave a projectile behind that could be traced like if they would shoot a bullet from a regular gun. Dean told her sister and nephew that killing Raeford would be, quote, profitable for everybody, end quote. She promised them a car, and she even promised them an acre of land in exchange for the murder. So this was a murder for hire. Donnie then borrowed a 12-gauge shotgun from a friend, and on Friday night, November 9th, 1979, Donnie met up with his aunts, Dean and Rena. Rena and Donnie got in the car at 11 p.m. to make the 2-hour drive back to North Carolina to Raeford's house. When they got to Fuquay, Variana, a small town about 30 miles from Bun Level, the pair stopped. They called Dean to see if she still wanted them to go through with the murder. Dean told them yes, she still wanted it done. So the pair got back in the car and continued driving to Raeford's house. Once they got there, Donnie was the one who climbed in the kitchen window, and Rena was the one that handed him the shotgun. Rena went back to the car and waited for Donnie to finish the job. After Donnie shot Raeford and killed him, he grabbed Raeford's wallet and then got back in the car with Rena. They drove back to Danville and arrived at the motel where Dean worked at between 5:30 and 6 a.m. And that's when they told Dean that Donnie got the job done. Raeford was officially dead. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
There's very little information about this investigation into Raeford's murder available on the web. But from things I found on sites like Ancestry.com and newspapers.com, I discovered that Dean filled out the paperwork to order Raeford's veteran grave marker on November 11th, 1979, the day after her nephew Donnie shot and killed him. Ironically, it was also Veterans Day. The form showed that Raeford was a master sergeant in the Air Force and served both in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Dean signed the VA Form 40-1330 and entered widow into the space for the person to indicate what their relationship to the deceased was. Now, that's kind of odd to me because divorcees aren't usually referred to as widows when their ex-husbands die. Not only had Dean been divorced from Raeford for 7 years before she had him killed, but she had been married and divorced a second time within those 7 years. The ink was barely dry on Raeford and Dean's December 26, 1972 divorce decree when Dean tied the knot again. On February 11, 1973, 32-year-old Dean married 24-year-old William Edward Eatman at the Christ King Lutheran Church in Danville, Virginia. It was William's first marriage and Dean's second. The marriage ended 18 whopping months later with the divorce being finalized in Texas on September 17, 1974. No other marriage records were found on the ancestry website, so we can assume that Dean's marriage to William was her last. The record indicated that Dean had changed her name to Eatman while she was married, but her name in every other document is listed as Darroch, so she must have changed it back to Raeford's last name after her second divorce. So let's backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to the life insurance policy. Dean applied for the benefits of that policy on November 27, 1979, 2.5 weeks after Raeford's murder. Per the policy, the benefits were payable to Dean Darroch. It sounds weird, I guess, that an ex-wife would be eligible for payout from a life insurance policy. But if you think about it, survivors' benefits in the military cannot be canceled if there is a divorce, unless the former spouse agrees to be taken off. It's called an irrevocable beneficiary, which is how I assume Raeford's policy maybe was set up. Anyway, Dean had the rightful right to pay out following his death, even though they were divorced. And also, he could have easily just left her on there, as maybe a way to support the kids in the event of his death. There's no information about what Dean did with the money, but the police were working on tracking down who killed Raeford. Like I said, there is little public information about the investigation, but Donnie Wells was on the police's radar and they were looking for him. Donnie Wells fled to Virginia and then California before being arrested. He was caught by the FBI on April 28, 1980 in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he was held on the charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Donnie was turned over to Harnett County and charged with Raeford's murder. It's unclear how Dean and Rena were implicated in the murder, but one can assume that maybe Donnie spilled the beans once he was arrested. Dean Taylor Darroch and her sister Rena Taylor Crowder were arrested in Danville, Virginia on August 6, 1980. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiring to commit murder. Rena incurred a third charge of accessory before the fact of murder. Donnie pled guilty to second-degree murder in August, but sentencing was delayed until after his aunt's trials. The sisters petitioned to stay in Virginia but were denied and extradited to North Carolina at the end of November 1980. Donnie was sentenced on October 13, 1981, for his guilty pleas to 2 counts of robbery and 2 counts of use of a firearm. In exchange for his guilty plea, he agreed to testify against Dean. Donnie received 2 50-year sentences for the counts of robbery. 30 years on one sentence was suspended in favor of 10 years of probation. The other 20 years would be served concurrently with the first 50-year sentence. He was also given 1 year on one weapons charge and 3 years on the other. Rena Crowder pled guilty to second-degree murder to avoid the death penalty and also agreed to testify against her sister, Dean. Rena received a 40-year sentence for her part in her ex-brother-in-law's murder. Dean went on trial for the charge of first-degree murder. During the trial, she took the stand in her own defense. During her testimony, Dean denied any involvement in her ex-husband's murder. She said she never spoke to her sister and nephew about killing Raeford. Donnie and Rena told a different version of events, however. During Dean's trial, they both testified that Dean wanted Raeford dead, and she wanted him dead so that she could collect his life insurance policy payout. Their testimony carried a lot of weight at trial. So did the actions of Donnie's mother, Dean's sister, Faye. During the trial, Faye ran from the courtroom screaming, "I hate her, I hate her, I hate her." Dean's own mother, her own mother testified for the prosecution and sealed her daughter's fate. Her mother, Berkeley Taylor, told the jury, quote, Dean didn't act around me like she cared very much for Raeford. I heard her say time after time she had just as soon for a rattlesnake to touch her as him, end quote. Dean admitted that she knew her ex-husband had some life insurance, but she claimed she didn't know she was the beneficiary until after his death. Despite her testimony, the jury found Dean Darroch guilty of accessory before the fact to murder, and Dean received a mandatory life in prison sentence. She would be eligible for parole after just 1 year. Yep, you heard me correctly. Dean appealed her conviction in March of 1982. The argument was that the state's charges that she planned the murder in Virginia and it being committed in North Carolina was unconstitutional under the Sixth Amendment. According to the court opinion, Dean felt that she was charged unlawfully because North Carolina did not have jurisdiction in Virginia where the crime was planned. But the court disagreed, stating that regardless of where the accessorial acts took place, the state, in this case North Carolina, may assert jurisdiction over the crime if the principal felony occurred there. The court opinion read, quote, "In our opinion, the Constitution requires only that the state have a legitimate interest peculiar to itself in punishing the accessorial offense," end quote. It went on quoting case law in Strassman versus Daly, quote, "Acts done outside a jurisdiction but intended to produce and producing detrimental effects within justify a state in punishing the cause of the harm as if defendant had been present at the effect," end quote. With this, Dean's conviction would stand, and she stayed in prison. At the time of her imprisonment in 1982, the superintendent at the prison told Dean that she didn't see Dean serving more than 8 years. The superintendent didn't know anyone else that stayed in prison any longer than that on the same exact charges. So Dean went up for parole year after year. And year after year, guess what? Her parole was denied. Dean wasn't idle during her incarceration, though. By 1986, she had earned her high school diploma and an associate degree from Shaw University's Alternative Education Program. They even held a small graduation ceremony for inmates who completed degrees in the prison's gymnasium. Dean's daughter, Vivian Starkey, was able to attend her mother's graduation ceremony. Dean earned honors and told the News and Observer that she hoped to use what she learned in a future career in either counseling or hotel management. She took classes in child development, secretarial science, and even English. She told the paper that she liked humanities the best and hoped to have her bachelor's degree done in the next 2 years. By 1997, Dean had finished her bachelor's degree from Shaw University and was very close to graduating with a Master's of Divinity in Christian Counseling from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. In an article that year from the Baptist Press, Dean was quoted as saying, quote, "When I learned that I did come up for parole every year, I was encouraged to do well and try to do what I needed to do in the system so I could get out on early parole," end quote. Despite her best efforts to be a model prisoner, parole eluded her. Meanwhile, Donnie had been released in 1989. He was the shooter, by the way, and Rena was paroled in 1990, and she was the driver and the one that handed the gun to Donnie. I haven't been able to find any official documentation about their release. However, these dates were reported in multiple news articles.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel or that white chocolate mocha. Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Holiday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Holiday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Holiday. Holiday, bring it on.
After Rena's parole, she went back to Danville, where Donnie also lived. He had gotten remarried and lived nearby. According to the News and Observer, Rena and Donnie did not see each other after their parole, despite living very close to each other. At the time of the article in 1996, Rena was working as a manager of a Kmart deli. She felt that outwardly she was very successful. But inside, she was still being punished for her part in her ex-brother-in-law's murder. She told the paper, quote, "It is a debt that can't be paid, and I will never be done with this. It will live with me forever," end quote. And when it came to Dean's parole, Rena was on team parole for her sister, even though she felt that they may never speak again in their lifetime. Rena felt that Dean was not a danger to society, but that Dean should tell her children the truth about her part in the murder so that they could eventually heal. While in prison, Dean was able to complete her higher education in person at Southwestern. I'm going to repeat that again. While in prison, Dean was able to complete her higher education in prison at Southeastern. Dean would start her day off at 5 a.m. by taking a bus for an hour from the prison in Raleigh to Wake Forest, which was about 10 miles away. From there, she had to catch a ride to the seminary, and she would arrive at the college at around 8 a.m. There, she would start a job working in the library, and she took classes as well. The article in the Baptist Press highlighted how important Dean said her family was to her. Even though she was in prison for planning her ex-husband's execution, she had earned the ability to leave the prison to work and take classes at Southeastern during the week, and she was permitted to visit her daughters twice a month on the weekends. And I will speak more about this tidbit in a little bit. During her time in prison, Dean Darroch spent about 8 years working with prison chaplains at a nearby hospital, the Raleigh Rescue Mission, and Shaw University. She didn't like working for the prison chaplain in the beginning. She actually states that she hated it and thought the chaplain was a hypocrite. You see, Dean was raised on hellfire and brimstone, being taught that God was full of wrath, and according to a 1997 interview, Dean believed that God was mean just like her mother. Eventually, Dean's thoughts on God started to turn around, and she began going to Bible study and started believing that God was a God of love. Because of her volunteerism with chaplains and her hard work at Southeastern, a lot of people advocated for Dean's parole. She had been up for parole 16 times since she was incarcerated and had been denied 16 times. Dean had a ton of advocates for her parole, including the prison superintendent, her co-workers, other students, and college professors that argued on her behalf at the State Parole Commission. Over Christmas break in 1996, a student named Sybil Needham gathered 140 signatures from people who supported Dean and wanted her to be paroled at her 17th parole hearing, and that hearing was scheduled for January 1997. Sybil told the Baptist Press, quote, "For Dean to have done with her life what she has done says a lot about her character, her stamina, and her integrity," end quote. But listen, y'all, on the flip side, not everyone supported parole for Dean Darroch. Raeford's elderly mother, Maggie Darroch, was 87 years old in 97, and she felt that Dean should stay in prison forever. In 1996, Maggie told the newspaper, quote, "She's put me through something that I can never get over. She is a bad character. I don't want her out. I want her to stay there as long as she can," end quote. Many members of the Darroch family wrote letters to the Parole Commission in opposition to Dean's release. They collected hundreds of signatures and met with the parole commissioners to voice their opinions. Maggie Darroch ended her interview with the paper saying, quote, "I think she's right where she ought to be," end quote. In that same News and Observer article, Dean told her version of what happened. She told the newspaper that she was raised in a, quote, "profoundly dysfunctional family," end quote. And she said that she was raised by her mother with 7 other siblings. 2 of them shared a father with her. Her mother worked as a mill worker trying to support the family. Her father was a religious fanatic who left the family when Dean was 6 years old. She recalled her father standing on the corner in Danville handing out religious tracts. And for those of you who might not know what a religious tract is, a tract is a pamphlet or leaflet of political or religious propaganda. According to Dean, her father didn't know who she and her siblings were. Dean had dropped out of high school and met Raeford Darroch when she was 18. Darroch was 24 years old and was in the Air Force at the time. According to Dean, Raeford was a drunk when she met him through her brother-in-law, but despite knowing that he was a drunk, they were soon married. Although married, they didn't spend a lot of time living together because of Raeford's military service. Because of his service, he was sent to Vietnam, as well as bases in Washington State and then Fort Bragg, North Carolina. In the News and Observer article, it said that Dean had 3 children. 2 of the children were Raeford's, and one was a different man's. The article states that at the time of Raeford's murder, the couple were estranged, but the documents that I found indicated that they were officially divorced in 1972. Because, being estranged alludes to them being legally still married. At any rate, Dean claimed that she was angry at Raeford for his drinking. According to her interview with the paper, Raeford had come to Danville a few weeks before her nephew Donnie shot and killed him at his home. Dean said that Raeford had gotten drunk off his butt while he was in Danville. He spilled food all over himself and then passed out in his car. Dean lost her temper about this situation and then complained to her nephew and her sister, saying, quote, "He makes me so mad I could kill him," end quote. Dean claimed that Donnie then volunteered to do it, saying, "I'll do it." Dean replied to her nephew that he can't kill anyone, but never said, "No, don't kill him." Instead, she told Donnie she wanted to kill Raeford out of frustration. She wanted him out of her life and to leave her kids alone. Dean told the paper she didn't think that Donnie could actually go through with it. In a January 1997 editorial in the News and Observer newspaper, a writer sent in his opinion about Dean's parole possibility. He lamented that he felt the Parole Commission should be commended for denying Dean's parole every year for the last 16 years, regardless of her reported rehabilitation. He believed that someone capable of a heinous crime like this would probably never be rehabilitated. A rebuttal to that editorial was printed the following week and was written by a woman who identified herself as Dean's supervisor for her work release job. The writer expressed her belief that Dean was innocent and incapable of masterminding Raeford's murder. The letter continued questioning why she would still be in prison when Donnie, who pulled the trigger, and Rena, who drove the getaway car, were freed years prior. Shockingly for some, but not for others, Dean was denied parole for the 17th time on February 3, 1997. In another source article, Raeford's sister, Lucille Johnson, the person who found Raeford's headless body the morning after he was murdered, told the paper, quote, "I'm extremely happy. More importantly, I'm happy we have a commission with the wisdom to look at all the facts and the strength to stand firm with their decision, in spite of all the attention and misleading brought on by a hardcore criminal," end quote. Conversely, a professor from Southeastern was quoted in the same article saying, quote, "I teach Old Testament and I'm an eye for an eye guy. I'm a conservative and am basically against parole. But the fact that the trigger guy is out and she is in seems like a gross inequity to me," end quote. It would be an additional 3 years before Dean's dream of true freedom would be granted. On February 21, 2000, the parole board voted to release Dean Taylor Darroch on parole. She only had 3 behavior infractions during her 20-year incarceration. Her first infraction was in 1993 for stealing property, her second infraction was in 1998 for disobeying an order, and her third and final infraction was in 1999 for misusing medication. The conditions of parole included a requirement to meet her parole officer 5 times a week. Some of the meetings would be scheduled, but others would be impromptu. Following her release, Dean worked at the Urban Ministries homeless shelter in Raleigh. Dean passed away on February 15, 2008 at the age of 68. In her obituary, the family expressed their gratitude to the staff at Duke for the care they provided to Dean before her death. It also indicated that in lieu of flowers, contributions could be made in Dean's name to Urban Ministries. Okay, when I started this episode, I said that this case was recommended by a family member, and that family member's name is Laura Lee. She is Raeford and Dean's granddaughter. Yep, Laura Lee's mom was Dean and Raeford's daughter. Laura Lee shared with me that she called Dean Granny, and that Granny was a very involved person while in prison, as you heard in this episode. But Laura Lee didn't really know that Granny was in prison, because according to her, Granny was always with Laura Lee's family because of all her weekend and holiday passes that she obtained while still in prison. Laura Lee describes her late grandmother as, quote, kind, thoughtful, and selfless, end quote. She even went as far as saying that Dean was like her second mom. Granny's love was unconditional. Laura Lee also said that despite what her grandmother did, she was the glue that held the family together. Laura Lee admitted that not everyone forgave Granny for planning Grandpa's murder. Laura Lee's uncle could never forgive Dean for orchestrating his father's death, and he held a lot of resentment. When Laura Lee got much older, her and Granny spoke about Raeford's murder, and Granny was very remorseful. She hated what she put her kids through, taking their father and how it changed 2 generations, and also how it affected Raeford's family. After Raeford was killed, his family stopped communicating with Raeford's kids. Most of them were still under the age of 18. And Laura Lee was under the impression that Raeford's family somehow blamed the kids. But maybe it was more about how the kids reminded them of Dean. Laura Lee did acknowledge that Granny had her manipulative ways. When she got out of prison, Granny Dean stayed with a friend she met in seminary. Laura Lee lived about a mile from Granny, but Granny was a time hog. She relied heavily on her family for companionship, even though everyone had their own lives. Laura Lee told me that there were many nights when the EMTs called her to tell them that Granny wasn't feeling well. And on 2 of those occasions, Granny actually had a stroke. Laura Lee believed that Granny was ill, but that she also loved getting all the attention for being ill. On Valentine's Day, 2008, Laura Lee got a call from the EMTs that Granny was in the hospital. Her mother got the same call, but because they both had Valentine's Day plans, they didn't rush to the hospital. And this wasn't something new for them since Grandma was always calling the EMTs anyway. Sadly, later that day, or maybe even early the next morning, Laura Lee received another call that Granny had slipped into a coma. The doctors didn't think she would make it. During that hospital visit, they determined that Granny Dean had acute myeloid leukemia, but they were going to try to treat it, but first they needed to get Granny's weight. Because Granny Dean was in a coma, the hospital attempted to weigh Dean using what Laura Lee refers to as a, quote, gurney weighing contraption, end quote. Dean weighed in at a whopping 400 pounds, and during the weigh-in, Dean had a heart attack and died. Laura Lee and her mother did not make it to the hospital in time to say goodbye, and she admits that she still lives with the guilt of not blowing off her Valentine's Day plans that day. She was able to see her grandma in the hospital, but she was already cold and blue by that point. This further changed Laura Lee's mother's life. Laura Lee ended by telling me that after the trial, Granny Dean and Donnie never spoke again, and the family didn't bring him up. He was very much, in her own words, a Voldemort. As for Rena, Laura Lee recalls that Rena was very special like Dean. She was another pillar of the family. Rena passed away on January 9th, 2023 from pneumonia. Before I end today, I would like to end with Raeford Darroch because he was the victim. Raeford was born on January 21st, 1934 in Harnett, North Carolina. He joined the Air Force on May 18th, 1957, serving until December 19th, 1972. He served in Korea, Vietnam, North Carolina, and Washington State. During his time in the Air Force, Raeford served as a loadmaster flying on C-130 cargo airplanes. In a citation from a Tactical Air Command periodical called TAC Attack dated June 1966, then Staff Sergeant Raeford M. Darroch from the 777th Troop Carrier Squadron, Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina, was selected as a Tactical Air Command Air Crewman of Distinction. The citation reads, quote, Sergeant Darroch was a crew loadmaster on a C-130 during a night paratroop drop exercise. Over the drop zone, the Army Jump Master's reserve chute was inadvertently deployed into the airstream by one of the troopers preparing to jump. Sergeant Darroch immediately recognized that the Jump Master would probably be dashed against the door of the aircraft. Once pulled from the aircraft, the Jump Master's main chute would deploy with the possibility that the 2 chutes might tangle and collapse. Sergeant Darroch leaped forward and cut the reserve chute shroud lines with a knife. Even though he was wearing a parachute, Sergeant Darroch risked his own life. Had he been unsuccessful in immediately cutting the shroud lines, he too could have been pulled from the aircraft, entangled with the Jump Master's parachutes, and dashed against the side of the aircraft. Sergeant Darroch's outstanding presence of mind, professional knowledge, and judgment in averting serious and possibly fatal injury to the Army Jump Master readily qualify him as a Tactical Air Command Loadmaster of distinction, end quote. Raeford Mitchell Darroch was laid to rest with military honors and Masonic rites. The headstone over his grave is the veteran headstone that Dean ordered the day after his murder. I want to take this time to thank Laura Lee for reaching out to me and also really for trusting me to tell this part of her family's history. I also want to give a shout out to Myrtle for researching and writing today's episode for me. If you haven't already followed me on social, be sure that you follow me on Instagram at Military Murder Podcast. I haven't posted in a while, but who knows, that may soon change. Also, if you have a listener tale, please click the link in the show notes and submit your story today. My sources for this episode include an appellate court opinion and articles in The Bee, Denver Register and Bee, The News and Observer, The Baptist Press, findagrave.com, and a Tactical Air Command periodical. Military Murder was created by Mama Margot Productions. This episode was produced by all of my boot camp and higher fan club members. The music was created by Tyops. If you would like to support this show, be sure to check me out at patreon.com/militarymurder or subscribe today on Apple Premium subscription. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next week.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.